have really mixed feelings about Hoppers. You know, a friend of mine is very excited about Hoppers. And when I was seeing Scream 7 again this weekend, they had so much fun Hoppers merch at the concession stand at the AMC. And I felt, it's so weird. I felt excitement. We want events at the multiplex, and we love Disney, a lot of us, right? And the end of this film is so good, but you have to get through the first act. And that's what makes me nervous. The first act of the film, it's just so message heavy, and Pixar's emotional manipulation is so obvious. It was a real eye roller. But then when Mabel finally enters the animal kingdom after the first act, even though the world building is shockingly sloppy and full of holes, you just have to let it go. You know, eventually, at first you're like, but wait, are you, what? And then you're like, forget it. But the movie goes so wildly off the rails and is so charming and funny that you get swept away in the fun. You're just like, I'm having such a good time, who cares? My audience, myself included, was literally howling with laughter. There was just so much, it was so funny particularly in the third act of the film. So again, what do I tell you to do? What do I say? And how do I and we feel about what's been happening to Pixar? I think that's really the place to start, because my feelings about Hoppers are not only complicated, but they stretch beyond Hoppers to Pixar. Like, as fun as this might be at parts, how long are we going to let Pixar keep doing this? All right, so back in the day, Pixar was a game changer. I'll never forget when I was a little kid going to see a Pixar movie and being surprised that there were hardly any other kids in the theater, and it was mostly adults. And I was like, I think it was for Finding Nemo. This sounds similar to my Time Cop story. Even as a kid, I was I observed a lot. But yeah, I was going to see Finding Nemo, and there were a ton of adults there. And usually, obviously, beforehand, when I'd seen, as a kid, seeing other kids' movies, it had been mostly families with other kids. So Pixar, what are your memories of seeing Pixar movies? I'd be real. And how do you think the audience in Pixar has changed over the years? So Pixar used to make really big movies with big ideas that attracted big audiences. But these days, so much about Pixar feels small. I think that's a great way to describe what's going on there. Ever since Onward, really, right? A lot of Pixar original movies, not the sequels, which are still doing quite well and are very good. I've been enjoying them. But the original movies feel like really long animated shorts, right? Don't you kind of get that feeling? Except for Elemental. I think Elemental worked, which is maybe why Peter Sohn got the Incredibles 3 directing gig. I'm still pretty nervous about that. I'm like, Brad Bird, what else are you doing, man? I mean, apparently it takes up a lot of your time, but I mean, this is like kind of important, Brad. All right, by the way, at the end of Hoppers, keep your eyes peeled for an Easter egg for Socks, the robot cat from Lightyear. That was great. Voiced by Peter Sohn, by the way. Very well. That was one of the best parts of Lightyear. If you've already seen Hoppers or you've seen it before watching this review, did you catch the Easter egg? So I'm warning you now, when you sit down to watch Hoppers and the movie gets started, you're going to be like, what did I get myself into? Or why did Grace tell me to watch this? Because, you know, Disney has always loved to kill off parents, and we've called them out for it. But Pixar, of course, ever the overachiever, is like, well, we're going to kill off grandparents. And you're like, come on. Like, I wondered as I watched the film, would it be so wrong if Mabel Tanaka had an adventure with her grandmother instead of as a way to deal with the grief of the loss of her grandmother? Like, it's just getting tiresome already, Pixar. And so, again, so obvious. And the first act of Hoppers is, as I said, just so bogged down by message. You feel like you're watching an educational animated short on National Geographic, or Epcot, as I told myself to get through it, rather than something that's first and foremost supposed to be a fun animated movie. Bob Iger spoke out about this when he came back to Disney, that this was an issue that they had there, that they'd gotten their wires crossed in the creative, swapping the A storyline with the B storyline. And wow, the first act of Hoppers is a perfect example of that. And I wonder if the folks at Pixar recognize that once Hoppers stops preaching and starts having fun, that is when the message of how we all need to work together truly starts to come across in an inviting, organic, and effective way. And they earned my tears. That's right. I didn't cry at the beginning because I was like, come on, Pixar, stop doing this. But at the end, I couldn't believe it. As I laughed, I also cried because it was quite moving. Because they stopped trying to they just let go. And that really was important, I think. I mean, that's one of their major slogans over at Disney. Listen to it. In some ways, message seems more important than creative over at Pixar these days, especially with movies like Turning Red, Elio, and now Hoppers. Not only do all these movies suffer from the same problems, and I enjoyed them. You know, if you liked Turning Red and Elio, you'll like Hoppers. That's kind of the group that it's in. I think Onward's a touch better. But anyway, these other three movies are in many ways interchangeable, and that such an innovative studio like Pixar would find itself becoming repetitive is, I think, something that should be a major cause for alarm over there. A big problem with Disney, this movie was a little frustrating at points. So I was thinking of some bigger issues while I was watching it, again, particularly at the beginning. And also when I left the theater, because it was like such a divide, again, such complicated feelings. But a big problem that Disney has that we're seeing in many of their divisions is that they have people who grew up with the Disney magic who now want to be a part of it and work at the company, but people who have made no effort to understand how Disney magic works. So a lot of that came from Walt. But I think that you have to try to understand Walt. You can't be like, well, he's gone now, so I guess we'll have to. No, well, how did Walt do what he did? He was a great creative, but he also understood audiences, and the studio continues to suffer from the loss of his stewardship. Once again, please check out the brilliant movie Saving Mr. Banks, which is available on Disney+. It's very sad. It will also make you cry, but it's great. And it showcases, some people will see Walt's ruthlessness, but it showcases Walt's eye for talent and his ability to corral that talent, sometimes multiple talents that's at odds, and point that talent with, obviously it wasn't 100%, but it was pretty close, towards tremendous success, which really, I think, benefited everyone and the material. Walt was able to take maybe things that weren't mainstream or commercial, and without losing what was important about them, make them mainstream and commercial. And talk about magic. That was something he was very good at. Now, creatives, especially those that don't want to be mainstream, again, watch Saving Mr. Banks, they don't like to be told no. They don't like to see any changes at all to their work, even if the core of it is retained. And especially these days, right? But as you see the Disney studio spin out of control in many ways and their rate of success drop, it's clear that someone is needed who can not only politely tell people no, right, but who can offer constructive criticism and suggestions on what to do instead. Somebody who does appreciate what the creative is trying to do, but will help them to do it in a bigger way. Hoppers is so half-baked, but shows such tremendous promise that I think it really makes it clear that Pixar is a ship without a captain. All right, so I'm very concerned. All right, so let's talk about what I do like about the film. And by the way, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Even cute little lizards can hit buttons on the phone. You can too. You can do subscribe. So yeah, when this movie gets going, it is shockingly funny, which is weird because the first act is so not funny. Well, it has one very good joke with the turtle. That was good. But it just gets so good if you can stick with it. It's very, very funny. John Hamm and Dave Franco do incredible voice work. They are hysterical. And I've never seen Bobby Moynihan used as well as he's used here. Seriously, his team should look at the qualities of this role, the whole package, and try to find him a similar one in live action, because it's just like everything clicked with Bobby Moynihan finally. I've always kind of liked Bobby Moynihan, but you never really felt he was a lead or even a major supporting. But here you are like, wow, we now know what to do with you. By the way, speaking of voices, that's Meryl Streep as the insect queen. I was wondering who did that voice. That's a crazy role. It's great. And the Animal Council, which, by the way, was one of the things that made the least sense in the movie. I was like, for the whole world? But that doesn't make it was weird. But again, you're just going to have to let it go. You're just going to have to let it go. But Meryl Streep was very good. Piper Curda she's good as Mabel, right? Mabel means very well. Her heart is in the right place, but she's very difficult to deal with, right? But what I loved most about the character of Mabel was the character design. I particularly loved her wild hair. I think she looked really great. And also she learns a really important message from George, the king of the beavers. No, I mean, I think beavers are obviously very important. There's obviously like, whatever. But but you learn a lot about beavers, okay? The animals. And you also learn a lot about working in a group and things like that. And I thought that the movie, again, when it led by example instead of preaching, had some really constructive, nice, moving messages. Also, I was surprised, side note, that they revealed, and the reason I can say it is because they never do anything with it. But at one point, very briefly, we see that Mayor Jerry lives with just his elderly mother who he cares for, just as Mabel had lived just with her elderly grandmother who she had cared for. And these two characters are supposed to be such staunch adversaries that they had this common ground. It was so weird that it was never noted or they did anything with that. I mean, it must have been cut from the film, but it was surprisingly sloppy for a Pixar movie. Now, for some of us, we just love the world of Disney, and that includes Pixar. And also, if you love movies on top of that, well, then a new Disney Pixar release is going to be hard to resist, particularly if you don't have to pay anything extra to see it, which is the camp that I am and my friends are in. So I might go see this, again. The animals are adorable, very adorable. And this lizard, by the way, who they've used a lot to promote the film, but doesn't have a big part in the movie, he is very, very cute and very, very funny. This is, I guess, how I bottom line Hoppers. All right. So Hoppers is worth your time, but not really your money. So if you can watch it as part of a theater subscription or maybe a half price matinee or a discount Tuesday ticket, right? That's probably the best way to go and see it. Or wait for it on Disney Plus down the line at no extra cost. But I think it is, especially again, if you like animation, if you're a Disney Pixar fan, you always want to see what they're up to. I think this has its moments for sure. And again, the second half is very funny. And it's fun to be at the movies, right? But I don't know. Again, you know where you fall on this. It's not a must-see, but it's a can-see. But really, Pixar, you got to get your act together because, particularly with original movies, Toy Story 5 looks great. I loved Inside Out too. I think Coco was the last real standout original movie they did, and that was almost a decade ago. So that's my thoughts on Hoppers. What do you think, right? Not only about Hoppers itself, but about what's going on with Pixar these days. Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.